everyone. I'm Victoria Turk. I'm features editor at Wired magazine. And at Wired, we are generally optimistic about technology. We celebrate technological developments. We believe in the potential for tech to make the world a better place. And AI certainly has a lot of potential. Self-driving vehicles could reduce automotive accidents. AI simulations could help us better use resources in the fight against the climate crisis. Research suggests that deep learning systems from Google-owned DeepMind could already be as good as doctors at spotting signs of breast cancer and eye disease. And just last week, researchers at MIT announced that an algorithm they developed had discovered an antibiotic powerful enough to kill drug-resistant bacteria. AI can really bring us many benefits. So why am I speaking for the proposition? Why do I fear the rise of artificial intelligence? Well, technology itself is never bad. It all comes down to how we use it, and the evidence for AI so far, I suggest, shows that there is plenty to fear on that front. I don't, like Elon Musk, fear an artificial superintelligence. I don't lose sleep over the singularity. And I don't, like Nick Bostrom, worry that an AI is going to turn us all into paperclips. No, the reasons I fear the rise of AI are less existential, much more mundane, but they're not thought experiments. They are already happening. One of the reasons I fear AI, in fact, is not that I think it's too intelligent, but that in many ways I think it is really too stupid. Machine learning systems are only as good as the data we put into them, and that data is often riddled with errors and bias. Algorithms, time and again, have been shown to reflect our worst discriminatory views. A few examples. In 2018, Reuters reported that Amazon scrapped an AI recruiting tool that reviewed job applicants' CVs because it favoured male candidates, even though developers tried to make it gender neutral. The system was trained on past applicants' CVs in an attempt to spot the patterns of success, and so it effectively taught itself that male candidates were preferable, because the company has historically been, and still is, male-dominated. It therefore penalised terms like women's chess club captain, and the names of all women's schools, presumably because they didn't appear very much in the data as markers of successful candidates. Another example, a 2016 ProPublica investigation into a US policing tool called Compass, which predicts if people will re-offend and can be used to inform decisions in courts, found that the algorithm made mistakes with white and black defendants at around the same rate, but in very different ways. While white defendants were more often mislabeled as at low risk of reoffending, black defendants were falsely flagged as a risk of offending at almost twice the rate of their white counterparts. And even here in Durham, police have been trialling an AI system called HART, the Harm Assessment Risk Tool, to help predict if someone who is arrested will reoffend. Concerns were raised about one metric which was formerly used in the tool, not anymore, which included postcode data, out of fears that this could lead to the targeting of specific communities. And for every instance of algorithmic bias that we hear about, we can assume there are many more that we don't. You don't know if you're not being advertised a good credit rate, or if you're not being suggested for a job. But bias is everywhere, and perhaps I'm asking too much of AI. It's true that humans are biased too, and it's human bias in the data to begin with that ends up creating this machine bias in the output. But the problem with machine bias is it can spread incredibly quickly and unknowingly. The same data sets are used and reused, and these can then reinforce and perpetuate those biases further. So if a recruitment algorithm learns that male candidates are historically more desirable, it might then recommend male candidates more often in the future, doubling down on that trend and essentially forming a feedback loop. And AI systems can also be hard to hold to account. So algorithms are often something of a black box, spitting out an answer without necessarily showing they're working. And even when you can technically analyze or audit them, Many companies don't allow this, citing concerns over revealing their intellectual property. As a result, we might not even know which data points are being put in to make decisions that really affect our lives. So at what point do we accept a level of potential bias in AI systems? Is it enough for an algorithm to be equally fair or a bit more fair than the average human job interviewer or police officer? By how much? 1%? 10%? And when it comes to error rates, how accurate does an AI system have to be for us to think it's acceptable to use it? This month, the Met Police started using live facial recognition in London, even though the only independent study of the system, which was conducted at the Met's request, found that across 6 trials, it only verifiably flagged 8 correct matches out of 42, a success rate of 19%. Is that accurate enough? And what if an AI system is more accurate for some people than others? Going back to this question of bias. On facial recognition again, in December, the US federal body, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, published a study into 189 facial recognition systems from 99 different developers that aim to match people's faces to those in its database and identify individuals. It found that African American and Asian faces were falsely identified 10 to 100 times more than Caucasian faces. That might be a slight inconvenience if you're trying to unlock your phone with your face, but these systems are increasingly being used to make, or at least inform, very serious decisions. Which brings us to the broader ethical dilemma of where we should use these systems and under which circumstances. In the UK, facial recognition systems have been used by police at protests, football games, music festivals, and shopping centres. How can we strike the balance between using the tech for good, in this case potentially helping to catch a wanted criminal, while not eroding the public's broader right to privacy? These are questions for the whole of society, and I don't think we've answered them yet. And that's why I fear the rise of AI right now. We're not ready. Speaking of questions for society, one final point I'd like to raise on why this House should fear the rise of AI is the broader consequences on our lives, such as the impact of automation on the workforce. Now, predictions about the rate of automation of jobs lost and or created vary widely, but jobs currently done by people will increasingly be able to be automated, from manufacturing to clerical work, computing, perhaps even driving. AI systems don't get tired, they don't take sick leave, they don't have workers' unions. Now, some people claim that this will work out for the best. Automation will free us from drudgery and repetitive tasks, instead letting us spend more time on creative tasks. In theory, it sounds great. But let's be real, do we really think that's going to happen? What are the incentives for companies creating or using these tools to consider the impact of their actions on society, rather than simply reducing their costs and increasing their profits? It's easy to hand-wave about retraining and upskilling people, but without a plan on how to do that and how to pay for it, I don't see it all just falling into place. A panel at the World Economic Forum warned last year that the rise of AI could exacerbate inequality between those who benefit from these technologies and those who don't, both on a global scale between countries and a more local one. Just look at Silicon Valley today, where the world's biggest tech companies are headquartered, and yet rates of homelessness are extreme. I don't think any of these issues are impossible to overcome, but until we have come up with an ethical and regulatory framework, I do fear the continued rise of AI. We've seen time and again that tech companies are either unable or unwilling to effectively self-regulate, and that the move fast and break things approach really just ends up breaking things. So when you consider the proposition of this debate, and whether you agree that the rise of artificial intelligence is something we should fear, I suggest you ask yourself this question. Do you trust that the individuals and organisations currently most set to profit from this technology have your best interests at heart?